Hi, I'm Tina. I am the owner of Always Awkward Hospitality, along with my husband David. And through opening up our most recent project, Beautiful South, we decided to invite some friends in with us along on this journey and join us on our Always Awkward Hospitality Advisory Board. So today I have two people with me, and they are going to be teaching us a little bit about Chinese culture, history, religion, teach us some phrases. So I hope you enjoy. All right, this is Elijah. Elijah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, so I'm a professor of religious studies at the College of Charleston, and one of my specialties is Chinese religion. And when I was studying Chinese religion, I was also studying Chinese philosophy, Chinese culture. So I've been teaching that for over 20 years. And of course, I've been eating Chinese food for my whole life since growing up near Chinatown in Toronto, and then visiting mainland China many times over the last 40 years or so. So I'm happy to share whatever knowledge I've picked up, and also welcome questions. Email me, text me. Let me know if you have any questions.
Nice. So I've got a few questions here. Um, so we'll start with, what are the four basic styles of regional Chinese food?
Yeah, so it's easy to imagine them because they're kind of like north, south, east, and west. Western is really Sichuan food, which is kuai fei, of course, and that's known for its spicy food. But it's not just spicy; it's a blend of garlic and chili and ginger. Um, Southern food, right here in beautiful South, is food mainly from Canton province and Hong Kong. And then probably the less known styles of Chinese food are Northern Chinese food, which is more wheat based and less rice based, and kind of a lot heartier for the rougher climate in the north. And then Eastern Chinese food along the coast is kind of a lighter style, made with centered around Shanghai. Xiaolongbao soup dumplings are probably the most famous from Eastern Chinese. But within that, there's tons of different variations as well. I mean, that's kind of like the big picture. You've got a special like imperial style Chinese food in Beijing for the emperors. You've got in the far southwest of China, you've got Yunnan food, which has its own specialty. So Chinese food is kind of like European food. I mean, it's infinite. It's not. Don't think of it as like the food of one country. Think of it the food of like a whole continent.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting visiting there, and obviously you think about different regions of food and how they're inspired by climate and also just the topography of them. And I thought it was really interesting also how, like, as we learn more, the styles of food also have to do with wellness and well-being and qi and those things. So do you mind speaking a little bit to that?
Yeah, that's really my specialty. I mean, when I look at some of these Chinese texts that were written over 2,000 years ago that talk about eating and health and nutrition, it's amazing just how modern they seem to now, because this whole idea of food as energy, the Chinese were saying that 2,500 years ago in this ancient text called Yuan Dao. And the things they say in this text are like, don't eat too much, but don't starve yourself. Eat a balance. Kind of avoid like fad diets, avoid starving yourself, avoid like cutting out whole groups of food. Just eat a well balanced diet, which is makes so much sense. But I feel like the Chinese sort of figured that out 2,500 years ago, and we're just trying to kind of getting back to that now.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, right? You're like, it's always been there for us to learn and to take from, and it's nice that, I don't know, people are recognizing. And
yeah, and one of the most essential parts of Chinese philosophy, which I think a lot of Americans are familiar with, is yin and yang. This kind of balance of light and dark and heavy and light, and food applies to that too. So a well balanced Chinese meal will always have some like heavier items, some braised food, some meats, and then a lot of lighter items. More lightly cooked, steamed vegetables, and it's that balance that balance between yin and yang that makes Chinese food so delicious,
yeah,
and healthy.
Yeah, for sure. And then also ferments, I feel like, play a big part in maybe only in the regions that we sort of play in, but I feel like fermented foods, which are
Yeah,
also very good for you, definitely play a piece.
yeah. I think in China even more than American Chinese food, which we can talk about later. Pickled dishes and fermented
Mm-hmm.
dishes are a big part of every meal.
Yeah, is
Yep.
kind of an off, but on is kimchi originated actually in China or did it originate in Korea? Do you know? Is
That's a
that
good question.
yeah?
Maybe my wife can step in later
Well,
and answer that. But I mean,
yeah,
there's definitely pickled. I mean, all kinds of pickled dishes you see in China.
yeah.
I don't know if
That was just one that
yeah,
was. I was like, we need to learn the answer on that one because we have a dish right now over at Kwai that has a kimchi in it, and
yeah.
so we were yeah. So I think this is an interesting question and obviously something that like can be kind of a hot button. But what counts as authentic Chinese
Yeah,
food?
well, this is a question I've been thinking about for years and years and teaching about not just about Chinese food, but about things like religion and philosophy and psychology, this question of authenticity. What does it mean to be authentic? And my short answer is that authenticity is a kind of trap, right? That we all want to be like our authentic selves, but authenticity suggests that there's some kind of inner unchanging essence to you, or in Chinese food there's some ultimate perfection of Chinese food that we should all aspire to. There's this like authentic core, and Chinese food, like every other kind of food or like everything, is changing over time, is changing over regional variation. So I've been eating in China since the 80s, and every time I go back and visit, like there's different types of food on the table because the chefs that are creative, they're creating new dishes. So is that authentic Chinese food or not? There was a literary critic in the 70s who wrote a really interesting book called Authenticity and Sincerity. And he said, don't worry about authenticity, worry about sincerity. Is the food you're cooking or the food you're serving or the food you're eating, made with like a real intent, and personally, I think the food at Kwai in beautiful South is, right? And I think it's authentic too. I mean, I remember when my wife and I ate at Kwai for the first time, and she tried the twice cooked pork, the hui guo ro. She was like, "Wow, this is the most authentic, food I've had in outside of my hometown." Right. So, but I wouldn't get too hung up on that because you know there's so many. Some people would say, "Oh, this." Chinese American food isn't authentic, but it's authentic to its own tradition of Chinese American
Right.
food, and so yeah, it's a difficult issue, but I wouldn't really worry about it.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like my relationship to that, other than being a business owner, is within my own culture and being Mexican American and people being like authentic tacos or and then it comes into the conversation around value around ethnic foods as well, which I think is kind of the two conversations when they come from certain people are sort of connected, which is maybe a topic for another time about valuing ethnic foods for the work and integrity and the sincerity that they bring. But all right, so the next question is, and this is a big one, what is the history of Chinese food in America?
Yeah, so there have been Chinese in the United States since at least the 1840s. They first were settled in San Francisco, and they came for the gold rush, like a lot of other people, to make a life for themselves, to make a better life. Mostly men who would then send for their families later. And once the kind of gold rush was finished or whatever, they found jobs in laundromats. They found jobs working the Transcontinental Railroad, and of course, they opened restaurants for themselves, but they had to appeal to Westerners, non-Chinese people, Americans. And most of that first generation of Chinese came from southern China, Canton province, and actually just one particular county called Taishan County or Toishan. So it was, so really a lot of Chinese American food comes from one particular part of China. It wasn't until there was a lot more immigration from China into America in the 1960s and 70s, where you had the rise of like Sichuan food and northern Chinese food. But before that, it was all kind of Cantonese based. And it also appealed to American sensibilities. So the sauces were generally sweeter. There was more meat. And dishes that we associate like, chow mein or chop suey, come out of that tradition, which, like we were saying earlier, now has its own history that's almost 200 years old. So, I mean, Chinese American food may not be authentic to China. It may be very different from the kind of food you eat when you're in China, but it's still its own thing, if you enjoy it.
Yeah, I think as we've come up with dishes for Beautiful South, it's interesting, or even at Quaife to be like, okay, this is something that now would be called like Kung Pao or something, but you're like, okay, where did this dish originate from, and how was it sort of changed to fit this palate and these preferences? And it's really interesting to kind of see the origin of some of these dishes and where we've gotten to today. And you're like, maybe only the fact that it's stir fried, there's peanuts and there's chicken, everything else is totally different. But it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, and like we say, Chinese food is always changing, so it makes sense that all these dishes would develop. And I think there's a kind of in the American South, they have a certain style of food to appeal to people here, and then of course Chinese immigrants have immigrated all over the world, so there's a kind of Chinese Indian food in India, and Chinese Korean food in Korea.
For sure. I always equate it when people come in, especially over to Quaife, where it is so specific.
Yeah.
And they're like, this isn't Chinese food. And I'm like, you wouldn't come to Charleston and ask for like Maine lobsters or, something that is very regionally specific to a certain part of America and expect it to all be the same. It's actually much broader distance there from what you're expecting to like what you're serving. So it's sort of, opens people's eyes a little bit, and they're like, oh, I would have never thought about it like that.
Right, China is a giant country, which it is, with a huge regional variation.
Totally. It makes, so they're like, oh, okay. So last question, what is the deep philosophy behind Chinese food?
Yeah, well, like we already talked about, the Chinese concept of qi, or a kind of vital energy, is really important, and to see food as energy, what you put in your body. The importance of balancing yin and yang, like we just talked about, is part of that. And I think that the Taoism is this Chinese religion that takes food very, very seriously, right? And Taoists can proclaim to eat very restricted diet, whether they actually did or not. But there are these Taoists who say if you only eat berries, or you abstain from grain all the time. Most Chinese people never did that, right? But they believe that they could actually become transcendent beings, almost like the equivalent of saints. Today in China, you can go to a Buddhist temple or a Taoist temple and get very specific temple cuisine, which often have just amazing fake meat. It's completely vegan, and I know you serve some of that food too, but it tastes like duck, or it tastes like fish, and I've been fooled by that. Religion and philosophy and food, go together really hand in hand in China.
Yeah. I think it's awesome. We were visiting. We wanted to. Was it Lashan, the giant
Buddha?
Yeah,
the giant Buddha.
And we really wanted to eat in that temple, and we couldn't get in. There was like timing issue or something. But looking at that, and you had spoken about that when you guys were helping me plan for that trip. And so I'm hoping we go back to Hong Kong and we're going to Hong Kong in June.
Oh, nice.
So I'll need helpful pointers, but that's definitely something we want to experience, is to be able to sit in a temple and have that experience.
I love Hong Kong. Oh, my best friend lives in Hong Kong, so I'll give you his info. Yeah.
So excited to dance around. But a little off topic there. But thank you so much.
Yeah. You want to